Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. Health workers in Trinidad and Tobago to be compensated for their sterling job during the pandemic. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Monday, 5th September 2022. Details when we return.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. Confirmation from Trinidad and Tobago's finance minister that $200 million in upcoming budget will go toward the special payment for public sector health workers. TV6's political editor Jewel Brown tells us more.
At the Spotlight on the Economy 2022 event held at the Hyatt Regency Hotel at the waterfront in Port of Spain on Friday, a 2023 budget preview from Finance Minister Colm Ilbert before he announced that Budget Day will be on September 26th.
Still crunching the numbers, but I think I can confidently say that our deficit for 2022 will be $2 billion. We started off this year with a projected deficit of $9 billion. And I think we're going to end the year with a deficit of $2 billion. And when you look at where it was in 2020, $17 billion in financing. Essential. We had to do it. We had to do it to keep the country running.
Prime Minister Dr. K.P. Rowley said the government had set about to do more with less.
The government holds itself responsible to make the best decisions in what continues to be a difficult situation, but not as difficult as it was when we were here 2020 looking forward into the heart of the pandemic. So ladies and gentlemen, we now have to continue to stay the course. If we don't stay the course, we could undo a lot of the good work that we have done.
Last week, Prime Minister Rowley said those in the public health sector deserve special recognition for the work they had done during the most difficult periods of the COVID pandemic.
I have not told the Minister of Finance yet, but I intend to tell him, in the budget coming up, I'm going to instruct the Ministry of Finance to make a separate and special payment to every member who works in the Ministry of Health.
During the Spotlight on the Economy, TV6 News sought an update from the Finance Minister. Have you been able to identify total in terms of that payment and how that will be financed?
Yes, we have identified the cost. I was in touch with the Minister of Health just a few days ago. It's going to cost us $200 million, and we will find the money for that. As the Prime Minister indicated, that sector needs to be recognized and appreciated and rewarded for steering the country through the COVID-19 crisis. $200 million.
TV6 News data contacted Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association President Edith Stewart via telephone for comment.
We really would want to give the Prime Minister kudos for following through on his promise and speaking with the Finance Minister and Finance Minister acknowledging that yes, $200 million would be found to pay towards healthcare workers. So that must be commended in light of the trying economic times we face.
But Mr. Stewart said there are payments owed by the government to public sector nurses.
We still expect to be paid our standing gratuity payments for all nursing and midwifery personnel and other healthcare workers, outstanding incremental payments.
Mr. Stewart also mentioned outstanding pension payments while speaking about the $200 million special payment to be budgeted for public sector health workers.
We still look forward. I hope you can understand that that does not absolve the government from their previous commitments to workers.
Jule Brown, TV6 News.
Stay the course. That's the message from Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley speaking during Government Spotlight on the economy on Friday last. He reiterated that government has had to take difficult fiscal measures since the beginning of the pandemic, especially due to decreased revenues and increased expenditure. More from TTT News.
Dr. Rowley said, prior to the pandemic, there were indications that the gap between expenditure and revenue was being closed. But increased demands led to increased expenditure in the health sector, along with closing several sectors. He noted that despite this, government continues to make the best decisions for the population as a whole.
We know that there are expectations in all quarters, but what the government had set out to do is to do more with less, knowing that it is quite easy for the population to demand more from less. And against that background, the government holds itself responsible to make the best decisions in what continues to be a difficult situation.
Rowley noted, many had predicted a collapse of the economy, but said this was not to be.
We now have to continue to stay the course. If we don't stay the course, we could undo a lot of the good work that we have done. And in the presentations today, we'll want to identify some of the very specific things that were done. And I would want to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the fiscal behavior of the government of Trinidad and Tobago under these circumstances has been exemplary.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, along with Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, Sort Young, is set to meet with a range of global energy companies who have significant investments in this country. The ministers will meet with BP's executives in London and Shell's management team in The Hague. They also have plans to hold talks with representatives from Proman in Switzerland. Proman is the largest downstream investor in the petrochemical gas industry in this country. They recently invested in upstream gas exploration and production. Minister of Finance Colm Imbert will act as Prime Minister until Dr. Rowley's return.
4% is the final offer. During Friday's Spotlight on the Economy 2022, Trinidad and Tobago's Minister of Finance Colm Imbert re-emphasized the government's position, even as trade union leaders continue to clamor for more for public servants.
According to the minister, the country cannot afford anything more than the offered 4% increase.
If the government were to accept the proposals being made by the major trade unions, we would have to find $30 billion in back pay just for the first 3 years, not even the second one.
Government's offer of 4% for the negotiation periods 2014 to 2019, $4.66 billion has been calculated as back pay up to June 2023, with an increase in recurrent costs for wages and salaries of $968 billion.
Asking for something that would cost $30 billion for the first 3 years. God alone knows what it will cost for the second 3 years. It might cost $50 billion. So these requests are just unrealistic and unsustainable.
The Minister of Finance said the government is committed to raising and making these payments to public servants.
The back and forth between the two main political parties in St. Lucia over the Huronora International Airport redevelopment project continues. Solange Alfred of HTS News Force reports.
Leader of the opposition, Alan Chasney, has penned an open letter to Prime Minister Philip J. Pierre entitled, quote, False Statement on Huronora Airport Redevelopment Project, end quote. Referencing statements made at a recent SLP town hall meeting, Chasney labeled Pierre's declarations as, quote, irresponsible, reckless, and completely false, end quote. In his open missive, he elaborates on various points he says are in need of clarification. On the matter of the HIA project being an untended venture, Chasney wrote, quote, this is yet another self-serving outright fabrication. The main contractor was OECC, a Taiwan company that built the St. Vincent terminal and has built billions of dollars of roads, airports, and seaports. OECC was awarded the contract, because concessional financing came from the Exim Bank of Taiwan. In turn, OECC tendered the piling contract and the main structure, as it would with all other two components of HIA. To further strengthen governance and transparency, there were 3 project overseers: OECC, a special project unit of SLASPA, and Harry International. End quote. According to Pierre, the HIA project is fraught with cost overruns. To this statement, Chasney asserts, quote, to suggest that the cost of piling at the new location in comparison to the old location constitutes cost overruns is at the very least irrational or deliberately misleading. The fact is, the piling at the new airport location came in exactly on budget. There are no cost overruns. End quote. Chasney alleges that the SLP government was presented with a well-planned project with all the financing in place. He says the government's actions of aborting those plans have not been in the best interest of the people of St. Lucia. In the wake of the brewing saga, calls have grown louder for documentation on the HIA project, plus a comprehensive government review to be made public for scrutiny. Sulish Alfred, HDS News Force.
Commodore of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force confirms the apprehension of migrants this past weekend. Altovis Munnings of ZNS News tells us Defense Force personnel are standing by.
According to CoastGuardNews.com, U.S. Coast Guard cutter Robert Yared's crew transferred 51 migrants to the Bahamas following an interdiction off the coast off the Key Sal Bank. A Coast Guard Air Station Clearwater airplane crew alerted Key West watchstanders over a sailing vessel about 29 miles northeast of Key Sal Bank around 11 o'clock this past Saturday morning. There were no injuries reported. Royal Bahamas Defense Force Commodore Dr. Raymond King confirming the apprehension with reporters Wednesday, pointing out that migratory movement has increased significantly.
That particular vessel was being monitored early on, and there was an intensive search for that vessel because we had intelligence on that vessel. Initially, it was reported to be moving towards Abaco along the eastern seaboard, and so we had shift resources to cover the eastern seaboard, and then we realized eventually that somehow it ended up on the western side of South Andros. So we sought the United States Coast Guard's assistance with that apprehension, because it was done in our waters. Those 51 migrants would be handed over to immigration officials in Grand Bahama. Most of those migrant movements now are moving towards the United States, but we have still seen some deliberate attempts to surprise us here to reach New Providence.
And then there's another recent episode of capturing Dominican poachers in our waters.
That boarding turned into a hostile boarding exercise. The vessel absconded into the Cuban territory. We sought assistance from the Cuban Border Patrol in apprehending that vessel on our behalf, but we ended up shadowing that vessel until she would have left the Bahamas completely.
The Defense Force has also identified a recurring trend among these Dominican poachers.
We're now seeking to time our fishes when the season opens, and they usually go out for about a month, and then they leave to come in to bring in their catch, and that is when the poachers feel as though it's safe. But as they come, they'll meet the Defense Force their position.
For the Bahamas Tonight, I'm Altaviz Munnings.
Hubbard is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardshardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.